I also felt like I didn't need to retire because now I still just run, and so I'd like to qualify for Olympic trials in the marathon. Um, and so for me, it's really just about playing outside, and I just really enjoy training every single day. So I feel like I'll never actually retire.
This episode of the Smart Athlete Podcast is brought to you by Solpre, skincare for athletes. Whether you're in the gym, on the mats, on the road, or in the pool, we protect your skin so you're more comfortable in your own body. To learn more, go to solpre.com.
Welcome to the Smart Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Funk. Today, I have another special episode where I've got two people hanging out with me. It's always nice when I get multiple people to talk to because then I get to talk less and I get more information. So it always makes my job a little bit easier. Dan is a former Division I runner, former pro triathlete. I'm going to ask him about that story because I'm sure there's a story there. He has his PhD in integrated physiology. He's currently working as a biomechanics researcher, and we're definitely going to get into that. Melissa is also a former D1 runner. She's currently training with the Boulder Track Club. She has her master's in integrated physiology, if I remember right. I didn't check that before we got going. Is currently working on her PhD. They're both coaches and run the Velocity Canyon Endurance Project. Welcome to the show, Dan Feeney and Melissa Mazzo.
Thanks for having us.
In unison, nice. Did you practice that? Did that just come naturally?
We've been practicing most of the day.
Oh yeah, I mean we're in the middle of quarantine, so got lots of time to spend doing that kind of stuff.
2, 1, okay. Matt, do either of you have a musical background at all?
Oh no.
No.
Okay. Well, the reason I ask is because there's so if you play in an ensemble of any sort, you get used to basically whoever's leading does this breath where they go, and then as they come down, you get the downbeat and everybody goes at the same time. So I was just like, maybe that's your trick, get that musical background. So Dan, I'll hop back. You were telling me before we got going, so you raced as a professional triathlete for I think 4 years. I think that's what I read. And you felt like you weren't good enough to have a formal retirement. What's the story there?
So Melissa and I met running at University of Delaware, and at the end of my sophomore year, they actually decided to cut the men's program.
Okay.
So I was thinking about transferring because I just really wanted to keep running. I was super into it. I felt like I had a lot of untapped potential, but at the same time, USA Triathlon began what was called the Collegiate Recruitment Program, where they were trying to take college runners or swimmers and if they had a background, the other. So I grew up swimming basically until I was 17, and then I started running. So instead of transferring, I basically just started training for triathlon then. I did a little stint at the Olympic Training Center, kind of try out, see how it goes, and then ended up racing mostly ITU triathlon, Major League Triathlon, and then a few half Ironmans over the next 4 or 5 years. I did it in conjunction with while I was doing my master's and the beginning of my PhD. Felt like it was a really nice balance between the two things. I never would say I really fully jumped into only doing triathlon, but I had a couple of results where I was super excited about it. I also felt like I didn't need to retire because now I still just run, and so I'd like to qualify for Olympic trials in the marathon. And so for me, it's really just about playing outside, and I just really enjoy training every single day. So I feel like I'll never actually retire.
Yeah. So I have to go on a little personal diversion here. What year did you join the CRP?
Probably 2012 would be my guess.
Okay.
Early.
Okay.
So the first
year. Did you go straight to the draft legals and qualify, or did you do nationals that year at all?
I did age group nationals and then qualified with one of those EDR races, the elite development races that year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't happen to go to Barb's clinic after the race in nationals that year, did you?
I went to one before the race, actually.
See, and that's where I would have missed you because that was my first clinic with Barb was after that race.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah, so I refer to myself as a tag along with the CRP group because I didn't hit the qualifying the A standard in running or anything. So I was high 15s in my 5K time. But Barb allowed me to kind of come along and be with that group. So I was I knew when I saw your name, I was like, gosh, that sounds familiar for some reason, and I just don't know. So apparently we just missed crossing paths at that point in time. So so one thing I'm whoever's listening, kind of catching you up. One thing Barb mentions is that there is so Barb Lindquist is the former head of USAT's collegiate recruitment program, and one thing Barb always mentions is there is a big jump from like amateur triathlon to pro triathlon, even if you easily qualify. So, can you tell me about the transition from one to the other, like kind of what your experience was?
Yeah, I definitely was pretty green. Like I was 20. Actually, I think I turned 21 the year that I turned pro, but I only raced amateur for 3 months, which was maybe good and bad. I was in Delaware still at the time, so there wasn't a ton. It's not like we live in Boulder now, so I would have a really good idea of what the scene was like. Being in Delaware, I really didn't have a great idea of exactly how fast people were biking. I just knew I could run pretty well and I was pretty decent at swimming.
Yeah.
So I mean, my first pro race I actually still did on a road bike with clip-ons, and then I raced ITU. But for me, it was just everything was faster. Like showed up to the first race, and I just remember being like totally overwhelmed with the routines that people had. In draft legal, actually, my first pro race was the one that Hunter Kemper broke his elbow at, like
Okay.
months before the Olympics.
Yeah.
So I mean, I first off remember getting out of the water suddenly like a minute behind the leaders, which was not super exciting. And then
Right.
being okay, well, draft legal bike is probably going to be pretty easy, but just absolutely hammering for 40K and then getting off and having to run 10K and suddenly not being nearly as fast of a 10K runner as I thought it was. So
Yeah.
that and then the non-drafting world just for pros, like the swim is so much faster. If you're not swimming at the front end, you're not going to be riding with anyone. And then the riding is just full on because you don't have anybody around you. A lot of times, the drafting rules are a little bit more strict. So
Right.
definitely jumped into the deep end. I would probably do it differently if I had this past view of how I have it now. Maybe got another year of biking under my belt, but I also really just like kind of going to the most extreme ends of things, like at first, and then figure out how to go from there.
See, that's the one thing that and you see it too, even with Hunter Kemper and all the big names, John Frodeno and all the guys now, or ladies really. It's like we have this kind of on the outside looking in, have this kind of like idealized version, and you can watch they streamed Barb's Olympic race on Facebook the other day, so I like watched the whole thing,
Uh,
and it's like you watch them and because they're so good at what they do, it's like they make it look easy,
Yeah.
So easy.
but you know that they're just like crushing it the whole way, and you experience it firsthand.
Yeah.
So it's all I always like hearing from pros and former pros are like, no man, like even if I'm in great shape, it's still just brutal the whole way through.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely experienced it a bunch of different times. My first year, we did ITU World Duathlon Championships, which were
Mm-hmm.
drafted. And so, sort of our CRP group thought, well, at least everyone ran in college background, so it should be no problem. But I mean, running a 10K in low 30 minutes and then jumping on a bike and then running another 5K was also just, threw us into the deep end and
So
nobody was really
painful.
ready. So it is really amazing when you watch those top athletes and they do look fluid and effortless. And to get to that point is a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. So Melissa, it begs the question: how did Dan not pull you in and be like, talk to Barb and like,
Oh, he
think about it?
but I take things a little bit more slowly. And I got into
Okay.
triathlon after we moved out here to Boulder, after I kind of saw how amazing all the athletes were around here and had kind of followed his journey through the whole professional track of triathlon. And so I opted for the collegiate club team and tried it out at CU for 2 years. I also have zero background swimming. So he basically taught me a few years ago from scratch. I could like doggy paddle to the end of the pool maybe on a good day. So that was super cool. We got involved with a local masters swim group, and I started in the slowest lane with the 80-year-olds who've been doing this forever, and they kind of taught me the ropes. I actually ended that 2 years of doing triathlon with like a quadruple duathlon type thing at collegiate nationals that year. The swim was canceled, so
Okay.
it was an Olympic race, a sprint race, and a relay. That was a lot of fun. And
Was
so
that back to back to back, or was that multiple days?
it was 2 days. So the Olympic
Okay.
on one day, or the sprint on one day, and then the Olympic and the relay on the second day.
Okay. Okay. And
So
you
it was,
clearly you survived. You're not dead.
yeah.
So you made it through.
Oh, I
How
couldn't
was the recovery after that?
do that.
Do what?
I couldn't run for about 2 weeks after that. It was just like totally smashed, but it was awesome. It was such a good experience.
And was that the end where you're like, okay, I blew up all the I put all the energy I could into this weekend and now I'm done forever? Or was like, how was the transition from there?
I realized I was super excited when the swim was canceled. And then every race I was just really looking forward to the running. So I decided, you know what? I have a lot of running goals that I still want to chase down. So kind of switched back over. At that point, we were already training with the Boulder Track Club a few times a week. And it was like, you know what? We're just going to go full on towards getting back on the track, running fast 5K, doing the short, hard stuff.
Are you doing like pretty typical training schedule as far as like kind of mirroring what you did in college, similar number of days, similar number of speed work, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's been pretty cool. Running with the group is honestly just the best. So do workouts on Tuesdays and Fridays, and then we have a long on Sundays that is just open to anyone. So that's keeping it pretty similar to college. And then we actually have a husky who loves to run.
Okay.
So most of our easy days are running with her. But in college, I actually had 4 different coaches for my 4 years. And so I spent a lot of the time injured or like trying to adjust.
Not sure, right? Because there's no unified vision for the whole point. Yeah.
Right. So it's been awesome, staying with a group consistently for the past few years. And we kind of write each other's training programs a little bit too if we want to try something new. So that's a lot of fun. Just having someone to bounce things off of.
So I mean, you don't argue with each other. You're like, Dan, that's a little too tough, or Dan, that's a little too easy, or like yelling at Melissa, like, hey, I can handle more than that. Like it's, I don't need an easy day. Like, do you deal with that, or is it just a simple like, okay, coach, like that's what I'm doing today?
Oh, that's funny.
We have a good back and forth because we both readily acknowledge that we respond to things differently. Like,
right.
For me, it's just like long grinding tempo runs, long uphill stuff. I could do that every week and I get pretty strong off that. Whereas Melissa's on the very other end of the spectrum.
I just want to do like 200s, hill sprints.
Okay.
I really need that top end stuff to feel good. But I've also been training for shorter races, so it's a good complement. We're kind of not overlapping that much in terms of our goals. So it's a definitely fresh perspective when we look at each other's training.
And I think it keeps from getting into one rut too easily. Like for me, I really hate going and running hard 400s or 200s, but Melissa's doing it. It's something that, even if you're training for a marathon or trail race, you should do. So it ends up balancing out pretty well.
Yeah. I just lost my train of thought. Dan, are you training by yourself all the time, or are you also with the Boulder Track Club?
I also run with Boulder Track Club. So we've got a really nice group of guys and girls that everyone works full time. We just, when you are commuting to work, we start our hard sessions at 7 a.m. on Tuesdays and Fridays, and then, get done in enough time to get to work. And I agree, just like Melissa said, like, I don't think I would be nearly as motivated as I am without that group. We're not meeting right now, but we still, have a Strava group and we still have a group text and stuff like that.
I know, like, I went to the track this morning to do some intervals, and just for no reason at all, I was like, man, I really miss my guys today. The guys I trained with in college. I mean, it's been like 9 years now, but for whatever reason, it just struck me this morning. It's a nice day here. It was like 60, sunny.
Oh yeah,
it smells like track. Do you guys get that? Like, I always wait. My girlfriend makes fun of me. She doesn't come from an athletic background, so I'm just like, it doesn't smell like track season yet. Like, the track has to be wet, a little rainy, like 55 to 60, somewhere around there. And then I'm like, now it smells like track season.
Really?
Yeah, it's a beautiful smell. Like early spring mornings, definitely get that. We
Yeah.
had one of those days this week. I feel like definitely a lot of nostalgia too.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's all mixed in there, and you're just like, something about, at least for me, starting high school, going through college, just having that kind of cycle for 8 years essentially. It's like the seasons to me aren't, spring, summer, fall, winter. It's like, no, it's cross country, indoor, outdoor, triathlon. Like those are my seasons.
Yeah.
So great.
So, um, Dan, I want to talk about your work. So you work as a biomechanics researcher, I think on predominantly on footwear. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about what you do.
For sure. So I work for a company called Boa Technology. You've probably seen it on cycling shoes, the dials, or snowboard boots. We also are in tennis shoes, running shoes, kind of all over the place now. Starting about 2 years ago, which is around when I started at Boa, and then even a few years before that, sort of the idea was to transform the company from just like a closure system or like replacing laces to saying, how can we fundamentally change how shoes fit for someone? And if
Mhm.
we make something fit better, can you improve their performance? So, if you think of any of the road racing shoes, like the super shoes that have come out now, if it doesn't
Mhm.
fit as well, then maybe you're losing some of that potential. Maybe there's actually a little
Right.
bit better there. So my job was basically to come in and work with one other guy at the time, Brett, and then now we have a third person on our team, Kate, and build a biomechanics lab. So we have a 2,700 square foot lab space, and basically any shoe that goes to market that isn't just a lace replacement. So if you look at like the New Balance 1500 or the Saucony Switchback for running shoes, you'll see that they're totally different. They don't have laces on the top; they have laces on the side of the shoe, and we've tried to design
Mhm.
straps and materials that will better conform to a wider shape of feet. And we'll
Mhm.
actually test all of those shoes in the lab. So any shoe that goes to market, the goal is to have that tested in the lab and make sure that it's providing some sort of benefit to the athlete. We're not just doing it to do it.
Okay, so um, this is my first cognitive introduction to Boa.
Okay.
So help me get up to speed.
Yeah.
So you're testing um, basically the fit or the last of the different shoes
Mhm.
um, for various companies, like you're like kind of an independent consultant.
It's interesting, right? Like it would sound like we're an independent consultant, but we're actually an ingredient brand. So if you think of like
Okay.
Gore-Tex, it's
Okay.
actually like brands will buy at the factory level the ingredients to make the shoe.
Gotcha.
What's unique about us is we do have this product service where we don't just want to give brands parts. We want to actually be involved in the development of that shoe. Um,
Okay.
and so for cycling shoes, for example, for the longest time, they had just basically been, okay, let's, use Velcro, let's use a ratchet system. And then
Hmm.
about 10 years ago, Boa came in and said, what if we do it differently? And now we're trying to do that again and say, what if there's a totally radically new way we could actually wrap around the foot? And
Hmm.
if it does fit better, we should be able to test some sort of performance derivative there.
Okay. So I'm with you now. The likeness to Gore-Tex makes things a lot simpler. Um, it's I just how it is. I mean, I worked in a shoe store for a number of years, so I was like I'm familiar with all the components and kind of some fitting shoes to people, but not actually the development stage, which is pretty neat. I mean, how do you get to work there just because you're like I'm a really cool guy and I know like I know about engineering and I can run, or like how does that inroad? What is the inroad into a technology company like that?
For sure. I think I'm super lucky because I think a lot of people that study biomechanics or physiology at some level probably would really enjoy a job like this.
Hmm.
Just aren't a ton of them exactly in the footwear development world. After I did my PhD in integrative physiology, I really specialized in like very esoteric stuff, like mathematical models of neurons. Um,
Okay.
but really, you do your PhD to learn how to learn, which is kind of a cliche. But from there, I started working for a tech startup in Silicon Valley for a little bit, and
Hmm.
then this opportunity at Boa came up, and it was sort of just a really cool dream come true to say, let's take these engineering and physiology perspectives that I have, and let's apply it to footwear. And so, especially some of the trail running initiatives that we have, some of the cycling and ski initiatives that we have are super exciting because they're sports that I do as well. So it does help to have that background in those sports.
Mm-hmm.
I know I can narrow down where I think a performance benefit might be. Like if you're running down a really steep trail, the fit of a shoe actually starts becoming super important.
Mm-hmm.
Or especially if you're trying to change direction really quickly on the trail. And so having that
Right.
athletic background definitely does help too.
So I'll get a little shoe nerdy here, I guess. So if you're listening, I apologize if this isn't interesting, but so when you're talking about trying to like, fit a last, um, how do you compensate for basically foot swelling and change of foot size during exercise? And obviously, like it's going to be different depending on application. Like say if I'm going out for a half-hour run versus like my friend Pat going out for 30 miles, like he's going to have a lot different kind of issues than I am because I'm simply not going to have the duration of time to have that increased swelling. So like, do you guys or how do you guys deal with like changing foot shape as exercise goes on?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And there are a bunch of different ways that you could go about answering it. I guess starting at the very beginning is depending on the nature of the shoe. So we have worked in a lot of trail shoes where we expect it to be a more ultra trail type user. So trail
Mm-hmm.
marathons, trail ultras, etc. And so definitely there's going to be swelling. There's also just going to be a desire maybe to change the fit during that race. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
going uphill versus downhill, you might want a different fit. You might want to ratchet it down before you go down a hill.
Okay.
That's one of the nice things about Boa is it's more modular. So just by turning
Okay.
the either way, you can actually increase or decrease the tension on the shoe.
But by
Okay.
just a small amount, you know,
Yeah, by
like
just 1 millimeter.
Right.
compared to laces, it's a lot more precise for sure.
Right. I actually think now that you're mentioning, you mentioned ratchet, and I was like, I actually think I've seen those on the cycling shoes.
Yep.
I can't recall where I was. Maybe racing 70.3 Santa Cruz. I was with my friend Kevin. He was looking at a pair. I can't remember which manufacturer had them,
Yep.
but he was
Yeah,
really
I
excited about
would
it at the
say
time.
about 80% of cycling brands will sell them. You see them less in triathlon, but they're still pretty common. And a lot of the top pros will, in longer distance races, will use a shoe with a Boa dial just because it generally fits a bit better.
Yeah.
The other thing we do is we have really low friction components. So, like you said, if your foot's swelling over the course of a run, it might not necessarily mean that you want less fit in your midfoot. You just might want some room to accommodate your toes.
Okay.
So we'll try to intentionally design how the shoe is actually closing so that as you move, the shoe can kind of conform to your foot as it changes over time. So for the longest time, people measure their feet by just standing on a brannock.
Right.
But when you're moving, the actual morphology of your foot will change. So
Right.
that's one of the cool things about our designs is because it's really low friction, it can actually move with your foot a little bit.
Okay.
And it's hard just using my hands. I can't really explain it, but if you look up some of the shoes that I was mentioning, I think you can kind of see how it's a different way to approach fitting a foot rather than just tying on top of the foot, getting it really tight in one spot. This is trying to get a more uniform fit.
Do you guys, because you're doing all this testing, do you have a situation ever where you're like, they'll give you, a new shoe, or I don't know, do you get pre-production shoes or post-production?
We usually it depends. When we're working with brands that we already work with, we do pre-production stuff. So
Okay.
we're making sure
Okay.
something.
So do you ever they'll send you a pre-production model and it's just like whatever, the other part is obviously optimizing the upper and what the upper is made out of and the various layers of the upper. But do you ever get them and you're just like, there's weak points in the upper where you're like, the durability of the shoe is going to be down because of the material they're using, and like, I don't know whether that's in your purview as a company, but just do you ever get to see kind of outside things like that and say, hey, you might want to check this out and see that change as well?
Yeah, that's one of the really cool things because with the brands we work with, we are pretty deeply connected. So 18
Mm-hmm.
months before a shoe goes to market, hopefully we're included in those first design briefs. And one of the first questions and one of the first capabilities that BOA had was durability of our system. So
Okay.
any shoe that has a BOA system on it is guaranteed for life of the shoe. So we will test any configuration. And by configuration, I mean like what are the angles that these laces are going through and where on the shoe are these laces being placed. We will test that to make sure it adheres to our standards so that it's not going to break on you. Now, on the flip
Okay.
side, our newer kind of biomechanical testing, will include both quantitative data, so running, changing direction, whatever in the shoe, but also qualitative feedback. And so we're at the point where we're working with brands and saying, hey, maybe this is great or this isn't great, and here's why. Let's fix it for the next round. So that's a lot of times that's the goal, is to make sure that anything that does get to market improves fit, improves performance, and people will qualitatively like it.
Okay. So my next big question here is, Melissa, so since you are working your PhD in, I'll say a similar field, it's the same umbrella. I don't know if you're specializing in the same field. Are you gonna take all of Dan's information and build a competing company?
Totally. No, just kidding. Honestly, when he got this job, I was like, you are raising the bar so high for me to now graduate and find a job that's as cool, especially if you want to stay here in Colorado. But
Yeah.
no, it's awesome. I love, being in a field where, like Dan kind of mentioned, you study something so specific and this tiny little pocket of science for your PhD. And I get to see how he's applying what he learned to the same field, but like this whole different side of it. It's really awesome. Also, just seeing how a company applies science, and you're the only true scientist. Now there are two of you, so you have like two true scientists at Boa, and they're translating their research and how they think about all these concepts to a company that's really focused on the marketing side of it, just interacting with brands and knowing how to present it, and it's definitely helpful looking forward.